Federal judges this past week ordered a redrawing of the lines between congressional districts in North Carolina, while the Supreme Court agreed to hear an appeal of a similar ruling in Texas. And then there's Pennsylvania, which features a congressional map that some critics say looks like a cartoon. Our cover story is reported by Rocca.
Goofy's over there, and he's kicking Donald.
No, what? I thought that Goofy was here doing the kicking. You think this is Goofy kicking Donald?
I don't know.
This is not a Rorschach test, and these are not patients.
Oh, those are his ears flapping.
Oh, the ears are flapping. Oh, okay, I got it.
They're suburban Philadelphia voters who live next door to Pennsylvania's 7th Congressional District, nicknamed Goofy Kicking Donald for its absurd, well, you can see why.
Wait a minute. Just, would Goofy ever kick Donald?
No,
I don't think Goofy...
Not and stay in the Disney World.
This district is one of the most gerrymandered in America.
What we're looking at is a disgrace, a political disgrace. There's no reason for that kind of gerrymandering. Here it is, folks, right in front of you.
And welcome to Gerrymandering 101. I promise you this won't hurt much. Gerrymandering is the manipulation of voting district lines, usually to give one party an advantage over the other. The word comes from Massachusetts Governor Elbridge Gerry, who in 1812 signed off on this salamander-shaped district, hence the term gerrymander, which sounds a lot better than gerrymander. Okay, there are 435 members in the House of Representatives. Pennsylvania has a lot of people, so it gets 18 House seats, like so. Now, some of these shapes, not just the 7th, are pretty wacky. We can all agree on that. Now, I know you're asking, why not just lay a nice rectangular grid over Pennsylvania? Problem solved, right? Well, you can't do that because people don't live evenly spread out. You got a lot of people over in Philly, a bunch over in Pittsburgh, not a lot of people in those places with no dots. Personally, I'd live over in Hershey. And each district has to have the same number of people. For that reason, and others we'll get to later, the shapes of districts are almost never going to be perfect squares. But how these shapes got to be so wacky is the issue here. Pennsylvania Democrats say the Republican-controlled state house drew these lines, or gerrymandered them, to create as many safe Republican seats as possible. Last election, Republicans won little more than half of the statewide vote, but the lion's share of congressional seats, 13 out of 18. Thank you for listening. And now let's return to our angry voters.
We're not getting the representation that we were intended to get, and the politicians just jiggle it around to meet their needs, not our needs.
They're angry because they say their Democratic-leaning communities were deliberately kept out of the 7th and lumped into the heavily Republican 16th district, ensuring that both went red.
It causes people, I think, to wonder, why should they even go out to vote? Is my vote going to count?
It was done to us personally, and there is no rational justification for that other than blind, naked power.
But I do think it's very difficult for us to try to draw these lines.
Both parties are guilty of gerrymandering.
Notorious examples of gerrymandering.
And both parties have long decried it.
The fact is, gerrymandering has become a national scandal.
It is absolutely essential that we block the gerrymandering ways of the Democratic Party.
But increasingly, the discussion around gerrymandering has been about the threat it poses to American democracy itself. Few current representatives want to talk about it. Iowa's Rod Blum does.
We shouldn't have to rig the system in our favor, or the Democrats shouldn't have to rig the system in their favor.
Blum is a Tea Party Republican who represents Iowa's 1st, a Democratic-leaning district. Blum says he can't afford to ignore any of his constituents.
With gerrymandering, the politician knows that they can be extreme right or extreme left and get reelected. If the district was more like mine, split evenly, then you're looking at every bill. What's a Republican think of this? What's a Democrat think of this? What's an independent think of it?
His is not a typical district. Nationwide gerrymandering is one reason that the number of competitive congressional seats, those where both parties have a good shot of winning, has plunged over the past 20 years from 164 to just 72. Now keep an eye on Pennsylvania's 7th. Those district lines we've been talking about are redrawn every 10 years, right after the census, usually by the state legislature, in a process known as redistricting. Get a load of how the 7th has changed over the years. Few know this process better than Kim Brace. For more than 40 years, he's been hired, mostly by Democrats, to help draw congressional districts. He was the only map maker we identified that was willing to talk to us on camera. You've got a lot of power in your pen.
That's true. It's not your pen. It's now a mouse.
It's okay.
It's a mouse. It's a mouse.
And armed with mountains of voter data, it's become more science than art. Theoretically, you could say to a Republican incumbent, listen, the 5300 block of River Road is a lot more Democratic now. Let's cut that out.
Sure.
When we draw the map.
Sure, that's possible. That's possible.
But Brace says there are a lot of factors that have to be considered. For instance, districts have to be contiguous. Communities of interest should be kept together. And how about this one?
Incumbent requests and incumbent protection is something that the courts have recognized is a fact of redistricting life.
Incumbent protection, like they're spotted owls.
Or something along that line, yes.
But this was precisely the rationale back in 2001, when, to protect the seat of Illinois Democrat Bobby Rush, Kim Brace cut out this residential block, home to a young primary challenger named Barack Obama.
You gerrymandered the future president of the United States out of a congressional district.
Right. So he then went for U.S. Senate and used that elevation to then become president.
Right. Not even a president could do what you did.
Probably not, I guess.
The general perception, it seems, not just from Democrats, from a lot of Republicans who want limits on gerrymandering, is that gerrymandering is bad for democracy.
It's not always the case, but one person's gerrymander is another one's beautiful art creation.
There may be no better example of this than Brace's most famous or infamous creation, Illinois' 4th, better known as the earmuffs. It was drawn to comply with the Voting Rights Act, which mandates that racial minorities be able to elect one of their own. And so he connected 2 Latino neighborhoods on Chicago's west side by this narrow highway corridor.
So we're in the 4th right now.
That's correct.
But you say there, over here, I'm in the Illinois 7th. And now I'm in the Illinois 4th. Now I'm in the Illinois 5th.
So 3 different districts right there.
That's correct, right there.
That's pretty amazing.
That is amazing.
Back in the 1990s, it was racial gerrymandering like this that dominated the discussion. Then in 2010, the GOP launched an ambitious campaign to win control of state governments and redraw the lines in their favor. They succeeded in a big way.
It was a sea change. We've now seen Congress being in control by the Republicans for this entire decade.
While Republican House candidates won about half of the nationwide vote in 2016, they took 55% of the seats, 241 to the Democrats' 194. But, and this is important, even if lines were not being drawn to favor Republicans, Democrats would still be at something of a disadvantage, says Stanford political scientist Jonathan Roden.
Suburbs and
That's because of where they live.
Democrats have been clustered in cities in the industrialized states ever since the New Deal. Ever since FDR, cities have become more Democratic and rural areas more Republican.
Roden studies how increasingly Republicans are spread across rural areas and Democrats packed into urban areas. Consider the influence on a state like Missouri.
The Democrats are highly concentrated in St. Louis and Kansas City. The gubernatorial elections are always very close. It's a place that Democrats can win statewide. But the best they can hope for in an 8-seat congressional delegation is 3 seats, and the current outcome is 2.
So is the issue gerrymandering or geography?
It's geography and gerrymandering. In order to understand the outcomes we see, we have to understand how those 2 things interact.
Hey, ho, ho, gerrymandering has to go.
But it's gerrymandering that's before the U.S. Supreme Court right now. A ruling is expected this spring. And Iowa's Rod Blum is willing to risk any advantage gerrymandering currently gives his party.
If putting curbs on partisan gerrymandering meant ceding control of the House to the Democrats, how would you feel about that?
I'm okay with it. We need to recruit good candidates, and we need to get out there, and we need to do a good job of governing, and we need to sell our message to the voters.
Losing an election is no small thing.
And I think the opposite. I think, if you lose an election, it's okay. That's the way our government is set up, not to have these people be here 30, 40, 50 years.
As for our voters in Pennsylvania, the state Supreme Court is considering redrawing the map. For them, a decision can't come soon enough.
Everyone wants to be treated fairly. Gerrymandering isn't fair. It's cheating. It's taking our votes and putting them where they won't make a difference.